The last time we finished, we were on chapter 63 called The Journey. And remember, it was when Bright Bill came home and he was visiting Roz and telling about his adventures. So we're going to continue with that. And then at that time, he found out what a greenhouse was, and his friends were invited in by the cat named Snooks. So let's continue with his adventure. Once or twice a day, the robot would go outside and return with a box or a bag. But most of the time, she stayed inside and quietly worked on the plants. There was a barn that I just had to explore. It was filled with animals and machines and piles of straw and 2 robots. One robot was fixing a broken door when I walked in. She was using a loud spinning tool called a saw. She pushed the saw through a long piece of wood, and dust shot into the air. Everything was going smoothly until the saw suddenly lurched forward and sliced right through 3 of the robot's fingers. But she was fine. A minute later, there was a whip sound as she popped on a new hand. Then she went right back to using the saw again. The other robot worked with the animals. Chickens, sheep, pigs, and cows. They were all in cages. The chickens kept asking me how I gotten out of my cage. I was explaining that I never had a cage when I heard panic squawks coming from the greenhouse. I ran back and found that a human had discovered the flock. We didn't know what he was saying, but he looked really angry. Longneck tried to defend us. He got in front and spread his wings and honked, but the human wasn't afraid. He pulled out a shiny stick and pointed it right at Longneck. Snooks hissed, "Look out! He's got a rifle!" Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot out from the rifle, and Longneck slumped to the floor. "He was dead, Ma." The flock was so scared. We fluttered around and honked and knocked over plants, but the human kept moving toward us, pointing his rifle. So I pecked the button to open the door, and we ran outside onto the cold and flew away from there as fast as we could. Without Longneck, the flock needed a new leader. Everyone wanted me to lead. I didn't know what to do, so I started by repeating Longneck's words. I squawked, "We are geese, and geese keep going." Then I took the point, and the flock spread out behind me. The weather had us all turned around, and nobody knew which way to go, so I just led us straight south. We saw more robots and humans and buildings, but we didn't stop. We knew we were way off course when we saw the ocean again, but at least it was a little warmer by the water. So I decided to follow the coastline for a while. There were more buildings by the coast. Most of them were land, but some were in the ocean. The ocean buildings were dirty and crumbling and leaning in different directions. There weren't any humans or robots in these buildings, only sea creatures. We saw ships on the water. We saw ships on the land. We even saw ships in the air. They buzzed through the sky like giant dragonflies. And then we reached a place called a city, where thousands of buildings and robots and humans and ships were all close together. When we stopped to rest on a rooftop, we met a friendly pigeon named Graybeak. She had grown up there, so she knew everything about a city. She flew us over towers and under bridges and kept us away from all the buzzing airships. And everywhere we went, there were robots. Some of the city robots were just like you, Ma, but others crawled on 6 legs, or rolled on wheels, or slid up and down sides of buildings. Some robots were really small, and some were really big. They moved things and cleaned things and built things and did every kind of job you can think of. Graybeak brought us down to a ledge on the side of a building and told us to look through the windows. Inside was a family of humans, and they had a Roz robot. When we looked into other buildings, we saw other humans with other robots. Every human seemed to have a robot. I told Graybeak about you, Ma, and she wanted to show us one last place. We flew out to the edge of the city to a really big building called a factory. Graybeak brought us to the roof windows, and we looked down into the factory and saw machines building, sparkling heads and torsos and limbs. The factory was building robots. A machine held up a robot torso and put two legs under it, and they snapped it into place. It put feet under the legs, and they snapped into place. It snapped arms into the shoulders and snapped hands into the arms. A head was snapped onto the top, and the robot was finished. Ma, the robot looked just like you. I think that factory is where you were built. I wanted to watch more robots being built, but it started snowing again. So we said goodbye to Graybeak and continued flying south. We saw fewer robots and humans and buildings and ships. The air became warmer and the snow disappeared. We started seeing other flocks of geese in the sky. So we followed them to the middle of a wide grassy field where there was a lake and hundreds of other geese. We'd finally reached the wintering grounds. After all we'd been through together, our flock had become very close. We kept to ourselves, eating and resting and remembering the geese we'd lost. But after a few weeks, we began to mingle with the other flocks. We met geese from all over the world, and they told us about their homes and their migrations and their troubles with the winter weather. Every flock had lost geese on the way there. A few flocks didn't even make it at all. Before we knew it, the early spring flowers were poking up and it was time to fly home. We followed the usual migration route north. We flew over fields and forests and hills. But we didn't see any signs of humans or robots, and that was fine with us. Eventually, we reached the ocean, and then our island, and then our pond, and then I saw you. Chapter 64, The Special Robot. After Bright Bill told the story of his winter, he and his mother sat in silence and thought. They thought about poor Longneck and the human who had killed him. They thought about farms and cities and factories. They thought about Roz and where she truly belonged. Then, after a while, Roz told Bright Bill her own winter story. She spoke of her long, dark hibernation, of how she'd woken to find the nest caved in around her. She spoke of blizzards and frozen animals. She spoke of many lodges she had built and the one that she caught fire. But she mostly spoke of all the new friendships she had forged. I used to think that you were the only animal who would ever care about me, she said to her son. I worried that without you around I would be alone again. But I was not alone. In fact, I made new friends, all on my own. I think the other animals might actually like me. Of course they like you, Ma, squawked the goose. You're the most likable robot I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. It was true. Bright Bill had seen hundreds of different robots that winter, and none of them were anything like Roz. None of them had learned how to speak with animals, or had saved an island from the cold, or adopted a gosling. As he sat there watching the robot's animal gestures and listening to her animal sounds, Bright Bill realized just how special his mother really was. Chapter 65, the invitation. Roz was the first to arrive at the next dawn truce. She had an important announcement to make. The robot waited in the great meadow as the sky slowly brightened and the animals slowly gathered. And once everyone was milling around and chatting, Roz began speaking in her perkiest voice. "Pardon the interruption. If I could please have a moment of your time." The crowd settled down and listened to their robot friend. "We made it through a terrible winter. A new generation of youngsters is arriving, and my son, Bright Bill, has just returned to the island with his flock. I think we can all agree that there is much to celebrate. So in addition to the dawn truce this morning, I would like us to have another truce this evening. We can call it the evening truce, or better yet, the party truce." The crowd began chattering with excitement. "I have planned a celebration," Roz continued, "and you are all invited. I will take care of everything. Just please meet me back here at dusk. Oh, and I have a little surprise. Actually, it's not little. It is quite large. The point is, I have planned a celebration, and I hope to see you all there." "Sounds great, Roz, but I'm afraid there's one problem with your plan." Mr. Beaver blinked his beady eyes. "The moon won't be out this evening, so it'll be too dark for some of us to see." "You are half correct," said Roz. "Tonight will be moonless, but it will not be dark, I promise. Now, if you will excuse me, I must prepare for our party. I will see everyone back here at dusk. Goodbye." Chapter 66, The Celebration. Dawn turned to day turned to dusk, and just as Roz had asked, animals were gathering again in the great meadow. Word had spread across the island that the robot was throwing a party, and everyone wanted to see what the fuss was about. The fuss seemed to be about a giant stack of wood. Roz had spent the day collecting logs and branches and stacking them in a perfect, massive tower. The animals crowded around it, trying to imagine its purpose. Then they saw a golden flame flickering in the distance. Roz emerged from the dark forest. In her hand was a flaming stick, which she held up like a torch. She was camouflaged in thick mud and clusters of wild flowers. But her camouflage wasn't for hiding. It was her party dress. The animals watched as the robot glided across the meadow, surrounded by a warm glow. "Thank you for all being here," she said as she joined the crowd. "1 year ago, I woke on the shore of this island. I was just a machine. I functioned. But you, my friends and family, you have taught me how to live. And so I thank you." We will continue chapter 66.